feel like everything that I thought coming into starting BlockIt, uh, almost everything turned out to be incorrect, which is kind of interesting. So I was
Wow.
wrong on almost every assumption. I really thought we would play super well in ambulatory, but the health systems wouldn't want to talk to us. Turns out that's completely opposite. Um, and
Wow.
there's just a number of those kind of strategic things that, interestingly, like the core product platform problem we're solving has never changed ever.
Mhm.
Like it's interesting. I was doing this with our guys a couple weeks ago, going back and looking at that first wireframe that we developed, 3.5 years ago. It's really not changed hardly at all.
Thank you for joining the Business Over Breakfast podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Rosenthal, and we are going to be jumping into another great episode, learning how I am starting to grow this business. Yeah, well, it was funny because I wrote on the first question that I had for you to kick things off was, what has your career looked like? And as you were describing what the focus of BlockIt is there, it reminded me of what I saw on, I forget what the name of the company was, the consulting company, where you grew, that account into it being one of the biggest accounts, or if not the biggest account for that company. And I was like, yeah, well, I mean, that's playing to your strengths, right? How to, grow with your customer, if you will. So, but would love to hear about that a bit, both from your experience growing that account as a consultant, and then also kind of what that looks like now at BlockIt.
Yeah, starting out, I mean, kind of even coming out of college, I've kind of been personally in and out of different consulting roles. So go into consulting, go into business operations, go back to consulting. And that was true when I was with the big company like Dell. Was also true in kind of the company I helped with between Dell and starting BlockIt, where I was just always in these kind of consultant trying to solve a particular problem and help people get to the next step. And I think probably I was probably the best, one of the best consultants, but also one of the worst. I had this combo of, I really believe, and this is kind of one of our core operating principles at BlockIt, in doing the right thing for the customer. Like, that's not a cliche with me. Like, I genuinely get excited about and draw pleasure from being able to really help. And so my first instinct is to jump in and help and to solve. And so as a consultant, I did that, and people value that. I think that they just don't see that very often. There's always well, let's talk about a scope of work first. Let's do this. And there's certainly a place for having discipline and having things scoped out. And I'm not suggesting that we don't do that, but um, I think just focusing on doing the right thing for the customer and helping them get where they need to go, and then working everything else out, has been a really good pattern for me. It worked really well in the consulting space. And I say that made me a really great consultant. It made me a really bad consultant, probably from a business standpoint, because um, I
Would
probably left.
deliver every time.
Oh, yeah, every time. Yeah, I probably left half the revenue potential on the table. But in terms of retention, never lost a customer that way. So I guess you can value it in different ways. But that's played true with BlockIt as well. We over deliver every time. We've over engineered our solution so that we've just gone above and beyond, and so that served us really well in being able to solve not just the problem for the end user ultimately within our platform, which is the patient and the consumer, but to also do that in a way where the users enjoy using the software. I think that was the most shocking thing coming into healthcare, was no one loved their technology. You go talk to a doctor's office or a health system, didn't matter. They hate it.
Absolutely.
They're just like, oh, this is something I have to do. And so when we, from the beginning, wanted to create something that was a joy to use, that genuinely made it better for the people who are actually using it and the people whose jobs were affected by this software being in place. So, um,
Yeah.
that's been true from a consulting to a software standpoint. I just enjoy operating like that, and that's served us really well.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's counterintuitive for a software business, especially with the Silicon Valley, looking at burn and churn rates and,
Hmm.
all
Yeah.
it's, It's like the whole pirate methodology too, that Uber pioneered, just start breaking things, get your minimum viable product in the hands of the customer, listen to their complaints, and just try and shoestring everything together. It's just totally
Yeah.
different. But you definitely have done I've been surprised. I've been, not surprised is the wrong word, because it sounds like I didn't believe in you, but I do. It's just you
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
things counterintuitively. So between starting at bootstrapping a software startup, first of all, and then over delivering constantly with your solution and your consulting around that solution. So how has that journey felt and looked for you, over the past 3 years?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I feel like everything that I thought coming into starting BlockIt, uh, almost everything turned out to be incorrect, which is kind of interesting. So I was
Wow.
wrong on almost every assumption. I really thought we would play super well in ambulatory, but the health systems wouldn't want to talk to us. Turns out that's completely opposite. Um, and
Wow.
there's just a number of those kind of strategic things that, interestingly, like the core product platform problem we're solving has never changed
Mm.
ever. Like it's interesting. I was doing this with our guys a couple weeks ago, going back and looking at that first wireframe that we developed, 3.5 years ago. It's really not changed hardly at all.
Wow.
But why it's valuable and who it's valuable to, and what they're willing to pay for it, and how they're using it, all those things, it's been an incredible ride, because we've just learned time and time again, just how our customers view it and how they see it and where they want to go with it. And so I think we've gotten really good at, or had to get really good rather, at being able to pivot effectively,
Mm.
and to do so, by effective, I mean really listening and doing it sooner rather than later. So
Mm.
we've probably had close to 20 iterations of strategy and pivots and things like that. And they're more massages and tweaks than they are hard pivots.
Yeah.
But I think constantly getting that customer feedback and constantly, hearing how they see it, how they want to use it, how they
Mm.
value it, is really important to shaping an effective strategy.
Mm.
And that's allowed us to be able to serve them in new and exciting ways. We just launched a product I had never even dreamed of, that was just kind of an alternate version of kind of our core product, that our customer said, "Hey, this would be really amazing for us to use." So
Awesome.
so the 3 years has been interesting. We've learned an
Mm.
incredible amount. I think the number one lesson is I knew almost nothing, and now I know. The only difference now is that I know very little, and so and so when I started, I felt like I knew everything, and so it's been a very humbling ride,
Mm.
and so it's been a joy, really.
Yeah. Wow. I forget who talked about this, but the whole idea of learning to unlearn. I've talked to some of your people
Yeah,
too,
yeah,
decorated, background in healthcare. So that can definitely influence and maybe even reinforce assumptions that could ultimately be wrong because the market changes, right? And things like that. So that's a good place to be, even the things that you have learned, something like COVID or, financial crises, they upturn things too, so
yeah.
you
Well,
have to
we've
kind of
certainly felt that.
unlearn. Yeah. So taking one step backwards here, what is BlockIt? Tell us what BlockIt is and why it's important.
Yeah, so BlockIt is a healthcare technology platform that's focused on attracting, engaging, and retaining the right patients within a defined network. And we define defined network typically as a health system and the organizations around that health system within a given ecosystem that make up kind of the care continuum within that community. So that would be a health system and provider offices that are independent and everything in between. Our goal is to help them be able to attract the right patients, to keep those patients engaged, and to be able to retain them within that network. And it's really important because healthcare is hard. It's not just hard on the clinical side, but it's hard to access
Mm.
and it's hard to navigate. And healthcare is one of those things where people are at their most vulnerable in a lot of ways. because they're not feeling well, or they're injured, or whatever the case may be. They're dealing with that for themselves, or for someone that they love and care for, and not being able to navigate and know and to get on a schedule and to be notified, some of the basics of what we see in other industries. Those not being available in healthcare is really just a major disservice, to our communities. And so BlockIt's goal is to be able to partner with high performing networks, health systems, and to be able to normalize that experience across those systems so that they can deliver a really incredible patient engagement experience, to take care of that patient, not just on the clinical side, but to also care and love them on the logistical side of things.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That was well articulated. I like that.
Well, I've had a lot of practice.
Yeah, there you go. That's awesome. So, what led you to find that issue? Because
Experience. Yeah. No, it's one of those things that, we don't go to the doctor a lot, but we've all experienced kind of how clunky it is. No one's surprised by this. Like when we talk about this and explain what we're doing, they're like, oh yeah, it's miserable, right? Because everyone has some experience where it was difficult to get that MRI done, or they got a surprise bill, or they're trying to go between 4 different doctors, but no one knows anything about the last visit, and they're sent home with a stack of papers and they have no idea what to do next. So this is a common occurrence, I think, that all of us have some experience with, and I think that it's becoming less tolerable because we have these things on our phones where I can tell where the Amazon delivery driver is in their route to deliver my package.
Yeah.
Right. So I've got that, but I couldn't tell you when my doctor's available. I certainly don't know where I'm going once I leave that doctor, if there's a referral involved. And that's silly. So I do think that the tolerance for these sorts of things is going down. And I don't think we should wait, or not waiting, at least with the customers we're working with, to address a discontentment. We're trying to meet that before it happens, where they're really having this incredible experience that they're used to now in all of these other arenas of life, to be able to do that within the healthcare space. So
okay. So was the idea born based off of like your experience as a patient?
yeah, it was actually born. We started the concept actually around pricing transparency, and kind of the genesis of where this came from. I worked for a big company and called Dell. Everyone knows who Dell is.
Yeah.
And we had switched to a high deductible health plan, and it was the first time that had happened, where you have this really large deductible, and you're responsible for your care 100% up to some number, right? And so for the first time, at least in my life, there was a consumer element now to how I consumed healthcare, and how my health insurance was utilized. And we, in that particular year, had a lot of healthcare services that we needed. And so I just found that process to be unmanageable. There were no tools available to make any sort of consumer decision, yet the economic vehicle for paying for healthcare was consumer based. So no tools, but that's how it was based.
Yeah,
and so
it's
we
crazy. That would not work in any other industry.
Any other industry. No, it wouldn't work. No, healthcare, it's just its own animal. So we built this prototype that had that was really geared around pricing transparency, and it felt a lot like Priceline. That was kind of where we got the kind of original idea, and we had built scheduling into this workflow, but I'd done it just as kind of a nice to have. I kind of thought, well, if I could pick the right MRI location, then it would be great to go ahead and get on the schedule, because I don't want to have to find it then call, right? And so we showed this to a couple of early kind of potential customers, and they're like, yeah, that's never going to work on the pricing side, because we don't even know. And then that was something I wasn't aware of, but a lot of the providers can't tell you what they're going to be paid for a given service. It's something that they find out later. So there was really no way to do it. You could do it on the cash side, but at the time, and certainly still, the insurance is such a huge part of that there was no way to effectively do it. But when we were going through that, they're like, yeah, that won't work. And let's go, well, that stinks. But they're like, this scheduling thing, though, that's pretty cool. We're not able to do that on the consumer side, and we're also not able to do that on the referral side. So when I'm send a patient from my office to the next office, or from the health system out to a provider, we don't have a really good way of doing that. In fact, we're using fax machines. So why don't you build out the consumer side around scheduling and referral management? That's something we could really use, which, wasn't the original concept. So we took that and developed out a prototype and worked that out with some original pilot customers. And it was just a really big success. I mean, It was really powerful. It gave them the ability to effectively move patients. It gave them the ability to do some engagement things that they weren't able to do before. And then that's kind of how the strategy evolved to go that route versus the pricing route.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really, I guess it's, I don't know if it's surprising or not, but that the health systems had the wherewithal to understand why that scheduling issue wasn't an issue from their perspective. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm curious that, how do you articulate to maybe a health system that's not as forward thinking or is not good at putting themselves in the patient's shoes when it comes to scheduling?
Yeah, we have been working on that because it is a challenge going into a health system in some regards, because patient access, the component, how we think about patient access is pretty broad and includes these different experiences. So from our standpoint, we have a provider directory consumer scheduling or patient scheduling side. We have a referral management side, which is more geared to provider interaction. We have a call center side that's built around an experience of helping a call center agent be more effective. And so when you go into a health system, those are different people, right? So the people who are concerned with consumers being able to schedule on the website are very different than the person running the access center trying to make decrease talk times, which is very different from a physician executive or a network integrity executive trying to make referral patterns work well, whether that's for value-based or for something else. And so it's difficult on trying to figure out where do you start with that, because it is really important. And what we stress with our health system partners is that those things are interlocking. They're part of the same continuum of patient access. And if you think about them independently, then you're really sub-optimizing the access points for how that patient would experience doing business with your health system. And so we've got to think about those things together, and we've got to leverage some of the tech infrastructure we're using to power those experiences by shaping different experiences on top of the same technology stack. And so groups are in different maturity stages. That's normal for any industry. And so depending on where a system is in the maturity scale, we will engage them where they are, and we'll help them walk through understanding, based on where they are, what step they need to take next. We don't go in with you have to do all these things today. We go in with where they are, meet them where they are, and help them walk into a more effective patient engagement strategy that's more holistic, that includes all these different access points.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. Yeah. Is there like, I guess it probably depends on the health system, and like you mentioned, their maturity, but is there like typically a person or a role within the health organization that's able to see across those silos?
It sometimes, yeah. There's kind of a newly created role that we've been seeing lately. It would be called Chief Digital Officer or Chief Transformation Officer, where this person is responsible for moving the health system or the network into a more modern technology set. And most of the time, if an organization has that level, and it's not always innovation really is a little bit different than moving into main technology stacks. Innovation is typically those kind of fringe things that are kind of unique or niche at the moment that will eventually become mainstream, while the transformation officer is generally looking at how do we do core workflows in a more effective way. So if the health system has that kind of a role, then typically they're going to have the vantage point to be able to see that. We also see it if a health system has chief revenue officer or a chief growth officer, someone who's really responsible for engaging the whole network and increasing the overall health of the system. That person would kind of have the vantage point to be able to see all of those things. Otherwise, it is more of a a point solution to a particular problem set that
Right.
we end up bringing in multiple parties and
Yeah.
having that
Yeah.
conversation as like a working session or
Right.
whatever.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's cool. I've been fascinated by. I'm first of all fascinated that this didn't exist. You know, like you mentioned, on any other industry, if you had such a challenge in doing business with with someone that would just wouldn't work. Like imagine, you know, if somebody that's trying to do business with BlockIt, you know, you just handed them papers and they left a meeting and had no idea what to do next. You'd never see that person again. You
That's
know,
right. Yeah, no, that's
so
exactly right.
it's just crazy that that still somehow works. But I want to focus a little bit of attention around the business itself. So and this is a little bit of selfish indulgence because, you know, as we mentioned earlier, I'm starting a business and have a lot to learn. So, what did the initial team, like putting the initial team together, look like, and what did your transition away from, you know, full-time work in a big company and kind of
Yeah.
taking that step look like? I know you all weren't necessarily looking to raise Silicon Valley level money either. So it's not just like, oh, well, I mean, we had $20 million in the bank. Of course, you're going to
Yeah,
step
we
out on
shaped
my
this
own.
really great team and we've
Right.
got, 30 executives. Yeah, no,
Right.
we didn't
Yeah, I
take
know
that route.
that's
Yeah.
not the story, so I'm super interested to hear about how you, you know, first did that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I can at least tell you all of the things not to do, because I feel like I made probably, there's probably many new mistakes that I'll make on my second kind of company founding. But man, I made, it seems like every mistake in the book when I started. When we started, we shaped the team with people who had more of a corporate experience. And I love, kind of our initial kind of grouping of I wouldn't even call it a team because we hadn't really moved forward or committed to kind of growing the company at that stage. But even kind of the early idea stage, we had a little bit more of a corporate focus versus people who had startup experience. And that was just a major hurdle for us because there's a lot to be learned, and there are a lot of great disciplines that come from a corporate experience, but those really aren't applicable in a startup experience, context until many, many, many years later, if you're super, super lucky.
Hmm.
And so we made some hard lessons there, just in terms of what's required and what's necessary. And one of those things was making the decision to go. I'd worked out with a mentor of mine and kind of the company I was helping build to go part time so that I could work on this.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah, so that was very gracious of him to allow me to do that, and that company to allow me to do that. But it still wasn't enough. It's one of those things you really have to jump in full on and make the full commitment, or there are just certain things that just don't happen because you don't have that fire
Hmm.
put towards you. And so that once I had made a full commitment, which I kind of did the part-time thing for about 4 months, realized and had some really great advisors that helped me realize that wasn't going to work, made the full commitment. That's when things really started to happen. And
Hmm.
by really start to happen, I mean, I was able to get through many more mistakes much more quickly.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so, and
Yeah.
so I think starting a company, you have to get really comfortable with being wrong 75% of the time.
Hmm.
And mentally that can be really challenging because,
That's exactly where I was just going to ask. I was like, hey, what is your psychology
yeah, so
around
the
that?
psychology of that, and I think I don't remember what study. I'm someone way smarter than me, but the study is that it takes two positive events to overcome a negative event.
Hmm.
And so if you do the math on 75% of your events are negative associated to 25, that math doesn't work,
Yeah.
right?
No.
If you're using that as kind of a metric. And so you have to be really solid, with your identity and who you are and why you're doing it, where
Hmm.
you're driving your motivation, where you're getting your value from,
Hmm.
to a much greater degree, at least on the surface, to a much greater degree than a more traditional job, because you've got this deficit in just the natural flow of things contributing to positivity.
Hmm.
So you got to be able to work through that, and that's
Yeah.
different, right? And so that's one of the things. Learning to operate in that, I was fortunate to have some people around me who helped me adapt to that really quickly.
Hmm.
And once you're there, the next step, in my opinion, is really figuring out how do I evaluate the decisions that I'm making. And traditionally,
Mm.
people just naturally, they'll think, well, I made a decision and here's the outcome. Therefore, I'm going to measure the decision based on the outcome.
Right.
Was it good or was it bad? Therefore, that was a good or bad decision. And that's just not true. At the very minimum, it's incomplete. But I've found that the outcome of something is not really a great indicator of whether a decision was good or bad. And so you have to kind of shape, okay,
Wow.
well, how am I making those decisions and what's going into that, and how am I going to evaluate that? Because there's so much in these kinds of situations, timing and luck and happenstance and all of those things playing into it, that the outcome's just not very instructive as to whether your decisions are getting better or not.
Well, and there's so many more variables to the outcome that you might deceive yourself into thinking it was a bad or good decision based off of
That's
a
correct.
variable you didn't know, you know.
Yep, that's
Crazy.
exactly right. Yeah, so I think learning that early on, and this is true in any sphere of life, but learning that early on as an early stage founder
Hmm.
is probably indicative whether you're going to be successful or not. If you don't learn that lesson, then
Hmm.
you may get lucky, and there's certainly people who, that's just how it happens for them. But if you want to be really effective and be able to make it through um, what is undoubtedly, they call it the valley of death. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
seen that chart before.
Yep.
If you want to make it through that, it has to do with your ability to weather the mental and the psycho part of
Yeah.
the kind of being wrong 75% of the time, partnered with your ability to measure how you're making decisions, and then to pivot from the times where you're not getting the outcome that you need.
Hmm.
So those are the two things
Yeah.
I've found to be most helpful early stage.
Yeah.
That
Yeah. So how do you evaluate decision making now? Like what's kind of do you have like a process, or is it, does it kind
mhm.
of depend sometimes, or what's kind of the way you do that?
Yeah, I generally, there's no exact formula for doing that, but a good indicator is how much data do I have and where am I getting the data from? And is this
Hmm.
data fact based or am I putting my spin on it?
Hmm.
Because being in a startup is so emotionally charged, there's this great temptation to put an optimist spin on it because you
Right.
want it to work so bad. I
Right.
want this thing to happen. I want to win this customer. And so you've got to be able to pull yourself back. You need that optimism to stick
Hmm.
with it, but you've got to be able
Right.
to pull yourself back mentally on your decision making to be as objective as you possibly can. And so
Hmm.
being able to measure, what is my believability of this data is really how I've come to learn
Hmm.
to evaluate decision making. So is this a 4 or is this an 8?
Yeah.
Is this, and so that measures and factors into how I would weight the outcome
Hmm.
is, what degree of believability does the data have? So this is true data, is it factual based without my influence? And then how believable is the person who's giving me that
Hmm.
data? And so those things kind of combined.
Yeah, it reminds me of Ray Dalio's. Have you ever read his book,
Very
Principles?
similar. Yeah.
Yeah,
You could take that, or you could take, I forget the author, but it's called Thinking in Bets. It's
yeah,
the best book I've ever read on decision making.
yeah.
And
I've
that,
heard of
that
it.
I
I
kind of effectively
haven't read it.
use, yeah, it's great. I effectively use her methodology. She's a professional poker player. I
Okay.
effectively use her methodology for how I think through, was this good or was this not good?
Annie Duke, Thinking in Back.
That's
In
it.
Bets.
Yeah. And
Okay.
you do. Yeah. Great author. Yeah. She did a great job.
All right. Just added it to my Amazon cart. I've heard of it. I just never read it yet. So cool. Nice. Okay. The next question for you here. Um, so you had a couple of co-founders. You're the CEO.
Hmm.
How was the role of the CEO? How was that kind of felt, articulated, and understood by the team at the early stage? And how's that morphed? What is the role of the CEO in your mind? And it can be so ambiguous to some people. So, and it's definitely
Yeah.
not as glamorous as the culture would like you to think.
I wouldn't say there's anything glamorous about it. I
Yeah.
I certainly
If
have
you
more
like eating
empathy.
dirt, it could be super
Yeah,
glamorous.
if you want all the blame and you give all of the credit, and that's just part of, that's how it goes. But I have found it, one, I've found a lot more empathy for people, and have even had to, like, almost ask for forgiveness in a way, because I was so hard on CEOs before I was a CEO.
Mm.
I don't understand. How could you possibly do that? Why couldn't you think in this way? Why didn't we go here? Why aren't you listening to me? And so you don't have that context to be able to know what it feels like to sit in that seat. So I have found, regardless of anything else, a great empathy for anyone in a CEO role, whether that's a big company, small company, nonprofit, whatever it is. Have a lot of empathy, because it is a lot of weight.
Mm.
Regardless of the size, the weight is the equivalent,
Mm.
to me, because the whether it's a small company or big company, because you value it so much, it's
Mm-hmm.
like part of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the role evolves over time. Definitely in our early stages, I certainly didn't feel like a CEO. I had the title, but everyone's kind of playing their part on the team and doing their thing, including the CEO role. That's more of a, all hands on deck. And then as the company's grown, there's been some things that I've really had to focus on, and things that my role does that that is different from the rest of the team. And so it's definitely evolved over time, from being kind of part of the team to kind of being, more like the office,
Mm.
uh, right? So it's not me; it's like this office that is really important to our team. That office is held well, and it's really important to our customers in terms of how they perceive us, how they engage us. The trust that they have in us comes from how that office is wielded. And so I take it with great humility that I'm in that role, and I take it with a lot of responsibility, even though I was one of the founders.
Mm.
I don't take that for granted. That it's a very personal thing to me, how that office is wielded.
Mm.
So
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you think about now, and kind of, you're out of the, I mean, you're out of the just getting off the ground stages, and you've got a viable product used by plenty of customers that's solid, good tech team, good service team, obviously good customer management with low churn. So
mhm.
how do you think about systems to bring that value to the customer? Because you as a consultant were able to do that yourself, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you definitely don't want a company just full of jakes that you're just relying on doing it themselves.
No one wants a company full of jakes. I promise that is not true in any sphere. So um, yeah.
uh, well, I think your consulting managers may feel differently. They'd love to have pods full of jakes,
Yeah, well,
but what is systems, and how have you thought about systems?
yeah. The way that I think about systems is probably a little bit different than what you would probably normally see in software. Certainly different than how you would see it in healthcare. I mean, I view it probably because I've spent so much time on the services side of things. I view when we come in and partner with a customer, like when we sign that agreement, and the kind of philosophy or the culture within our teams is that we are settling in, and that's kind of what I call it. We are settling in to a long-term relationship with them, where we are starting with whatever we're starting with, but we're going to continue to add value, and whether we're making more money or not, we're going to continue to add value and shape that relationship for the long haul. And that is very different, not because of churn, not
Mm-hmm.
because I want to keep our net revenue retention up above 100%, because that's what you're supposed to do, or keep whatever.
Right.
We do it because that's how we value our customers. Like we engage with them on that level, and plan to be there for the long haul. That's very atypical. Typically, what you would find is it's a numbers game, and you blitz your
Right.
strategy, and you try to get your software out there, and it's all sales. And once you're there, it's there, and if they churn, they churn. We have a very different philosophy, and so we've really never done marketing. Almost all of our growth has been from referrals, and from word of mouth, and from organic mechanisms. We're 100% referenceable. We take a lot of pride in that with our bigger customers, because we settle in. And so we've got this settle in mentality, And then we've also got this, if you want to use Bezos's term, day one or
Yeah.
whatever mentality
Love that.
around continuing to evolve. For us, our clients are intimately involved with the mindset of continuing to evolve the platform. And so we have everything that we do. We do our roadmap is never more than 6 months long, and it is chock full of things that our customers have helped us refine and prioritize and shape. We bring our engineering talent to it and our innovative talent to it to make it maybe to make it our own and to be able to add value to it. But our
Yeah.
customers are intimately involved in that process. So
Mm.
we're not interested in putting in one piece of software and then letting that sit there for 10 years.
Right.
If it's not different, even next quarter, if we've not been able to add continuous improvement to that experience, then we're not doing what I feel we've been called to do in terms of shepherding that agreement. So
Wow.
those are the two things we think of in terms of system. There's this settling in combined with this day one philosophy of being able to continually improve, but have a this kind of mindset towards this really intimate long-term relationship with our
Mm.
customers.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I mean, those two things aren't necessarily extremes, but even when you were talking about the role of a CEO and starting the company and your psychology, and even now here talking about systems, there's kind of these extremes that you're holding in tandem. You could and we could rattle off names. It wouldn't be nice about companies that have only been focused on sales, blitz scaling, as some thought leaders like to say it, that are pirates and, try and just take over the world quickly and then figure out the solution later. Or the other extreme of, digging yourself in a hole for 2 years, building this, what you think is an awesome product, but you don't get the customer feedback, right? So trying
Exactly.
to
That's exactly
walk
right.
that line, that's tough. It's not
Yeah.
fun. It can be challenging, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It actually brings quite a bit of peace to us. I don't know. In our team, there's that vein that runs through all of our team members. I think, if you don't have it, it's just not pleasant to be here.
Hmm.
And we've kind of seen, a couple of examples where there just wasn't the right fit culturally.
Hmm.
And it was usually because of one of those two things. There was this desire to go and conquer, or there was a lack of desire to continue to evolve and to involve our customer in that evolution.
Hmm.
Those things are just not culturally, they don't work here. And so so that's just been part of our learning in terms of how we shape, the best team to be able to deliver on our mission.
Yeah.
Has been interesting.
Yeah. The other topic I wanted to talk about, if you've got a little bit more time here,
Sure.
is so one of the things that I think is another tension that I've been struggling with in my mind, that I would love to hear your insights on, is the tension between profitability and pricing, compared to like that settling in. Not if you took that settling into an extreme where it's like, I want to be like a friend, and really be only focused on a friendship. That's why sometimes family business is challenging, because
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have this relationship first mentality, but we are in business, and there is such thing as good profit, like that there's a good book on that. But how do you hold those two things in tension, profitability and pricing to your
Yeah.
customers, and then also with the settling in, that could be taken to the wrong extreme, that's really not helpful to your customers, because in order to innovate you need money.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right.
You and I
It,
aren't innovating this product.
yeah, it is a difficult balance, and it's even harder in the early stages because you're not entirely sure what your pricing should even be.
Right.
Right. And so you're testing different, methodologies and different price points and even different ways of presenting pricing, and so you can't really get a flavor for that until the company matures a little bit. But I've always thought about this, and I'm not great at this. But we kind of keep these things in check by thinking about it in two ways. For one, want to be thought of, and I want our company to be thought of as being generous. And so if we are if the worst someone can call us is you're just too generous, I am okay with that. So that's a personal belief thing. But generosity and in our pricing and in our delivery and how we think about shaping economics, that there has to be a spirit of generosity there for it to be meaningful from my personal perspective. And since I get to set the culture, that's what we do. That balanced with the concept that is very important. And I had a conversation with a customer about this yesterday, because we were trying to shape the economics of this really big deal. And without profit, there is no mission. Without profit, there is no innovation. Without profit, our company, our team is not able to serve you well. Therefore, you can't serve your customer well. And so there is this balance that has to be taken with being generous and having this spirit of generosity, combined with this viewpoint of having an equitable deal where there is profit there so that you can further the mission. And I think and we're really open with that, with our customer base. And I think you could talk to any of the executives we do business with, that we are very straightforward and super fair, to the point of being generous. And so if that's how we've shaped it, it sounds easy. It's not easy. I'm not claiming that it is. Yeah. But those are the two things that we try to hold in tandem, is this spirit of generosity combined with the ability to drive enough profit to further the mission and to help our customers succeed.
Yeah. Feel free to deconstruct the assumption behind this, because it's a little vulnerable here, but
sure.
How do you keep from someone that may not share that perspective of their vendors from taking advantage?
Yeah, we have that. And we've gotten caught up in that a little bit, where we wake up and we realize, man, we have really gone, this is not generosity. This is bad stewardship. Where we've given away too much. We've not been firm enough in our pricing structure. So there is a point where generosity becomes a negative. It's not generosity anymore. It really is a lack of stewardship. So we've had to really put checkpoints and put some process in place for us to really look at that and to measure that. I am not a process person. I'm the opposite of that. I'm also easygoing and non-confrontational, which is not ideal for some of the things I have to do. And so having that process there, though, while it can be uncomfortable to have those checkpoints with our clients and partners, is necessary to keep that spirit of generosity from flowing into an element of bad stewardship, which ultimately decreases the ability for us to serve our customers well. Right. And so, we get into those tough situations where we have to be very clear, is that we cannot serve you well unless we get this back to an equitable state. And honestly, sometimes it doesn't work, because there are just some folks and some customers where that's just not a concern. And that's unfortunate. And we try to work through that in other ways and escalate those things if need be. But it is a tough balance.
Yeah, it's interesting, because there's some tenets that I think are super valuable for salespeople, in sales and marketing, that are not super prevalent. That's what I'm focused on, but as well as on the executive level, like yourself, the CEO. One being the intent behind why you're doing business. I always say to my colleagues too, it's like, if there's only room for one person in your head, either you or your customer. And if it's you, they'll smell your commission breath and run away.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, that is
exactly
I'm stealing that commission breath from Josh Braun, and it's really good analogy that I love. Good. It pops into my head all the time whenever I'm thinking about the size of the deal and get excited by the size of the deal. It's like, okay, is the customer in my mind right now? Is the customer receiving 10 times the value of this deal? Because if they're not, then I either need to lower my price. And if I'm not able to lower my price, then I need to be detached. And that's the other thing I was going to talk about, is detachment. It seems like you have that, where it's like, okay, if this deal isn't equitable for us in this long-term relationship that you're planning on settling into, then you're in 2 years from now, they're going to reap the consequences of trying to rake you over the coals of pricing with a poorly performing product because you weren't able to invest in it, you know? So it's kind of like there's like a level of like belief behind that, you know, that you got to believe that detachment is ultimately good for the customer, and walking away is actually good for both you and the customer, right? Because you'll
Yeah.
both find yourselves in a really tough position and very confrontational conversation 2 years from now. Which is, that's just, I feel like it's tough though. That's such a tough thing because these decisions and conversations happen in instances, you know?
Yeah, they do. They
Yeah.
do. Yeah. I think the easy path to that, I say easy, it depends on the person, I guess, but if your value system is oriented around doing the absolute best thing for the customer, and you have the belief that if you do that, longer term, you will reap some benefit from that, or you will be able to reinvest in your product or whatever the case may be. But if you start with, I'm going to do the absolute best thing for the customer, and you really believe that, then that will also play into your ability to set pricing and to set boundaries. Because if you get below a mark where you are not able to really serve that customer well, then it's not an emotional thing, and it's not, you're able to detach from the economics of the deal. It has nothing to do with the pricing. It has to do with, I'm not able to serve you well
Right.
in this scenario, and because I care about, I truly do, our team does, I just can't do it.
Mm.
And so I refuse to serve you poorly.
Yeah.
And so that's like an interesting thing for a customer to hear is,
Yeah.
I refuse to serve you poorly. I'm just
Yeah.
not gonna, you may think that's in your best interest for us to be beat up, but it's not. And so if
Mm.
you're not willing to see that, I am.
Mm.
And so you need to find someone who can serve you under those parameters, but it's just not going to be our team.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Wow.
I think that level of detachment and focus is very helpful.
Yeah. 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 And it's still, customer centric, which is cool. Um, that's interesting. So, finishing up here, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, walking through 3 interesting years, right, of being a CEO in the healthcare space. A lot's happened in tech in 3 years. A lot's happened in healthcare in 3 years. So what is your outlook or some of your future thoughts of the healthcare industry?
Oh man, that is a tough one. The industry has undergone so many changes with COVID. I think that for the most part, the things that we typically think about and are excited about have been accelerated, even though it may take a few more months for those things for people to be in a position economically. A lot of our customers are struggling economically, just due to the fall off in volumes and things like that. But I do feel this brought a hyper awareness to the tool sets available and how people are engaging customers and how they would do that in a virtual world. And so I do feel this season, or 2020, has ushered in, really in a permanent way, the combination of the virtual world, and including care delivery within the virtual world, with the in-person world.
Mm.
And so being able to bridge this virtual in-person hybrid delivery care model is going to become ultimately really important. And so we
Mm.
feel that, from our standpoint, the patient engagement, and that's a broad bucket again, is so important, to not only to invest in, but just in terms of the health of the healthcare ecosystem. Being able to do that well, is critical to being able to hit some of the things that the industry needs to do to be able to ultimately lower cost. I mean, our costs are becoming unsustainable, have been for a long time. And so we think that this hybrid delivery model, patient engagement being at the forefront, it's kind of the day for patient engagement. And we're hopeful and are seeing this within our customers, that investments are going to be made to that end.
Mm.
And we're excited to be a part of some of those strategies.
Yeah.
And we feel that it will have an outsized impact on cost and quality and the ability to serve patients by being able to effectively navigate them, and to be able to effectively shape an engagement experience that's in line with how they engage all of the other things that they're doing. And so if we want to hit value-based care metrics, if we want people to be effective in their, healthy goals and stuff like that, all those things have to come together. We believe patient access is the key, or patient engagement is the key to that. And we're excited to be able to play whatever role our clients deem appropriate as part of that strategy.
That's awesome. That's cool. Yeah, they say, COVID pulled, in some situations, pulled like 2030 into 2021, as far as tech is concerned in our virtual living. But
yeah,
that's cool. Cool. Well, any parting shots or anything before we close out?
Man, parting shots? No. I am excited for you. It sounds like there's some exciting things going on in your world. Around available if there's anything that I can do, or you want to bounce anything off of me.
Yeah.
But I appreciate you having me on. I love talking about this stuff. So I appreciate you giving me a shout out and letting me sit with you today.
Yeah, appreciate it, Jake. Yeah, I mean, your wisdom I try and be a sponge as much as possible. So I figured, what better time to have some really distinct questions and turn the recording button on so I can reference it later. So hopefully,
well, you can, one of my mentors always says, you can keep or discard what I just said. So it's up to you. I hope it's useful.
Keep or discard. I like it.
Keep or discard. Yeah.
Thank you again for joining today's episode of the Business Over Breakfast podcast. We appreciate you joining. And I wanted to also mention, if you are interested in creating a podcast for your business, please contact me at Steven@aura.media, AURRA.media. We create and build podcasts for B2B brands looking to use the content and the value derived from their podcast episodes in their marketing. Thank you.